But both he and Wallace knew nature too well not to perceive that this is by no means the only possible and necessary course of affairs. If the physical and the biological conditions of a given area, the extension of the area occupied by a given species, and the habits of all the members of the latter remained unchanged, then the sudden appearance of a new variety might mean the starving out and the extermination of all the individuals which were not endowed in a sufficient degree with the new feature by which the new variety is characterized. But such a combination of conditions is precisely what we do not see in nature. Each species is continually tending to enlarge its abode. Migration to new abodes is the rule with the slow snail, as with the swift bird. Physical changes are continually going on in every given area, and new varieties among animals consist in an immense number of cases, perhaps in the majority, not in the growth of new weapons for snatching the food from the mouth of its congeners. Food is only one out of 100 of various conditions of existence, but as Wallace himself shows in a charming paragraph on the divergence of characters (Darwinism, page 107), in forming new habits, moving to new abodes, and taking to new sorts of food. In all such cases there will be no extermination, even no competition, the new adaptation being a relief from competition, if it ever existed, and yet there will be after a time an absence of intermediate links, in consequence of a mere survival of those which are best fitted for the new conditions. As surely as under the hypothesis of extermination of the parental form, it hardly need be added that if we admit with Spencer all the Lamarckians and Darwin himself the modifying influence of the surroundings upon the species, there remains still less necessity for the extermination of the intermediate forms. The importance of migration and of the consequent isolation of groups of animals for the origin of new varieties and ultimately of new species, which was indicated by Maurice Wagner, was fully recognized by Darwin himself. Consequent researchers have only accentuated the importance of this factor, and they have shown how the largeness of the area occupied by a given species, which Darwin considered with full reason so important for the appearance of new varieties, can be combined with the isolation of parts of a species in consequence of local geological changes or of local barriers. It would be impossible to enter here into the discussion of this wide question, but a few remarks will do to illustrate the combined action of these agencies. It is known that portions of a given species will often take to a new sort of food. The squirrels, for instance, when there is a scarcity of cones in the large forests, remove to a fir tree forest, and this change of food has certainly well-known physiological effects on the squirrels. If this change of habits does not last, if next year the cones are again plentiful in the dark woods, no new variety of squirrels will evidently arise from this cause. But if part of the wide area occupied by the squirrels begins to have its physical characters altered in consequence of, let us say, a milder climate or desiccation, which both bring about an increase of the pine forest in proportion to the large woods, and if some other conditions concur to induce the squirrels to dwell on the outskirts of the desiccating region, we shall have then a new variety, that is, an incipient new species of squirrels, without there having been anything that would deserve the name of extermination among the squirrels. A larger proportion of squirrels of the new better adapted variety would survive every year, and the intermediate links would die in the course of time, without having been starved out by multitude competitors. This is exactly what we see going on during the great physical changes which are accomplished over large areas in Central Asia, owing to the desiccation which is going on there since the glacial period. To take another example, it has been proved by geologists that the present wild horse (Equus przewalski) has slowly been evolved during the later parts of the Tertiary and the Quaternary period, but that during this succession of ages its ancestors were not confined to some given limited area of the globe. They wandered over both the Old and New World, returning in all probability after a time to the pastures which they had in the course of their migrations formerly left. According to Madame Marie Pavlov, who has made a special study of this subject, they migrated from Asia to Africa, stayed there some time, and returned next to Asia. Whether this double migration become firm or not, the fact of a former extension of the ancestor of our horse over Asia, Africa, and America is settled beyond doubt. Consequently, If we do not find now in Asia all the intermediate links between the present wild horse and its Asiatic post-tertiary ancestors, this does not mean at all that the intermediate links have been exterminated. No such extermination has ever taken place. No exceptional mortality may even have occurred among the ancestral species. The individuals which belong to intermediate varieties and species have died in the usual course of events, often amidst plentiful food, and their remains were buried all over the globe. In short, if we carefully consider this matter, and carefully reread what Darwin himself wrote upon this subject, we see that if the word extermination be used at all in connection with transitional varieties, it must be used in its metaphoric sense. As to competition, this expression too is continually used by Darwin. See for instance the paragraph on extinction, as an image or as a way of speaking, rather than with the intention of conveying the idea of a real competition between two portions of the same species for the means of existence. At any rate, the absence of intermediate forms is no argument in favour of it. In reality, the chief argument in favour of a keen competition for the means of existence continually going on within every animal species is, to use Professor Jade's expression, the arithmetical argument borrowed from Malthus. But this argument does not prove it at all. We might as well take a number of villages in southeast Russia, the inhabitants of which enjoy plenty of food, but have no sanitary accommodation of any kind, and seeing that for the last 80 years the birth rate was 60 in the thousand, while the population is now what is 80 years ago, we might conclude that there has been a terrible competition between the inhabitants. But the truth is that from year to year the population remains stationary, for the simple reason that one-third of the newborn died before reaching the 6th month of life, one half died within the next 4 years, and out of each 100 born, only 17 or so reached the age of 20. The newcomers went away before having grown to be competitors. It is evident that if such is the case with men, it is still more the case with animals. In the fevered world, the destruction of the eggs goes on such a tremendous scale that eggs are the chief food of several species in the early summer, not to say a word of the storms, the inundations which destroy nests by the million in America, and the sudden changes of weather which are fatal to the young mammals. Each storm, each inundation, each visit of a rat to a bird's nest, each sudden change of temperature take away those competitors which appear so terrible in theory. As to the facts of an extremely rapid increase of horses and cattle in America, of pigs and rabbits in New Zealand, and even of wild animals imported from Europe (where their numbers are kept down by men, not by competition), they rather seem opposed to the theory of overpopulation. If horses and cattle could so rapidly multiply in America, it simply proved that however numberless the buffaloes and other ruminants were at that time in the New World, its grass-eating population was far below what the prairies could maintain. If millions of intruders have found plenty of food without starving out the former population of the prairies, we must rather conclude that the Europeans found a want of grass-eaters in America, not an excess, and we have good reasons to believe that want of animal population is the natural state of things all over the world, but with but a few temporary exceptions to the rule. The actual numbers of animals in a given region are determined not by the highest feeding capacity of the region, but by what it is every year under the most unfavorable conditions, so that for that reason alone competition hardly can be a normal condition, but other causes intervene as well to cut down the animal population below even that low standard. If we take the horses and cattle which are grazing all the winter through in the steppes of Transbaikalia, we find them very lean and exhausted at the end of the winter. But they grow exhausted not because there is not enough food for all of them, the grass buried under a thin sheet of snow is everywhere in abundance, but because of the difficulty of getting it from beneath the snow, and this difficulty is the same for all horses alike. Besides, days of glazed frost are common in early spring, and if several such days come in succession, the horses grow still more exhausted. But then comes a snowstorm which compels the already weakened animals to remain without any food for several days, and very great numbers of them die. The losses during the spring are so severe that if the season has been more inclement than usual, they are even not repaired by the new breeds, the more so as all horses are exhausted, and the young foals are born in a weaker condition. The number of horses and cattle thus always remain beneath what they otherwise might be. All the year round there is food for 5 or 10 times as many animals, and yet their population increases extremely slowly. But as soon as the burial rate owner makes ever so small a provision of hay in the steppes, and